I was sitting at my desk when the message came through. The blue glow of my laptop screen had been my only companion for the past 3 hours. Architecture models scattered across the small surface like miniature cities I would never build. My coffee had gone cold somewhere around 11:30, but I kept reaching for it anyway, letting the bitter liquid anchor me to the present moment as I struggled through another late night of coursework. The phone buzzed against the wooden surface with that particular urgency that only comes after midnight. I almost ignored it. Almost. But something about the timing felt different, felt heavy with the kind of weight that pulls you away from whatever small task you've been using to distract yourself from the larger questions you cannot answer. Damien's name appeared on the screen, and my chest tightened before I even read the words. Can I stay over? Don't feel like being alone tonight. I stared at the message for longer than I should have. 12 words that somehow contained everything and nothing at once. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, and I found myself calculating the distance between intention and meaning, between what he was asking and what I wanted him to be asking. Of course, I typed back. Always. The apartment felt different after I sent that message. Smaller somehow, as if the walls had shifted closer together in preparation for what was coming. I closed my laptop and pushed away from the desk, suddenly conscious of every detail around me. The stack of books on the floor that I had been meaning to organize for weeks. The guitar in the corner that still belonged to him, left behind after last summer when he spent more nights here than at his own place. The sketches pinned to the wall above my bed, architectural drawings that would never become buildings, dreams rendered in pencil and ink. I straightened the pillows on the couch and wondered if I was preparing for a guest or for something else entirely. Something I could not name, could not allow myself to consider too carefully. Damien arrived 20 minutes later, and I knew before I opened the door that something fundamental had shifted. His shoulders carried a weight I had never seen before, and when he looked at me, his eyes held a kind of exhaustion that sleep could not cure. He had been crying. Not recently, but recently enough that the evidence lingered in the red rim around his eyes, in the way he held his mouth like he was still protecting himself from words he could not take back. He stepped inside without saying anything, dropping his backpack by the couch with the kind of finality that suggested he would not be picking it up again anytime soon. I watched him collapse into the corner of my sofa, his long frame folding into itself as if he were trying to disappear. She left, he said finally. His voice came out lower than usual, scraped raw from conversations I had not witnessed. Said I was too distant. Said she couldn't figure out what I was thinking. I sat down on the opposite end of the couch, far enough away to give him space, but close enough to offer whatever comfort he might accept. The silence between us stretched and contracted like something alive, and I found myself studying the familiar angles of his face, as if I were seeing them for the first time. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it, even as a selfish part of me whispered that I was not sorry at all, that this moment had been inevitable, that perhaps she had seen something in his eyes that he himself could not yet recognize. He shrugged and leaned his head back against the cushions. 2 years, he said. 2 years, and she said I never really let her in. Maybe she was right. I wanted to tell him that some people are not meant to be let in, that some doors are better left locked until the right person comes along with the right key. Instead, I asked if he wanted something to drink, something to eat, anything that might fill the space between what he needed and what I could safely offer. He shook his head and closed his eyes. Just this, he said. Just being here. We sat in the darkness of my living room until the early hours of morning, not talking, not moving, just existing in the same space as if proximity alone could heal whatever had been broken. I watched the way his chest rose and fell with each breath, the way his fingers curled against the fabric of the couch, the way the streetlight outside painted half his face in amber and left the other half in shadow. When he finally stirred, it was to ask if he could sleep in my bed instead of on the couch. His apartment felt too empty, he said, too full of her absence. I said yes because I could not imagine saying anything else. I said yes because 18 months of careful friendship had taught me that Damien only asked for what he truly needed, and if he needed to be close to someone tonight, I would not be the one to turn him away. We moved through the ritual of preparing for sleep with the easy familiarity of people who had shared space before. He borrowed a t-shirt from my drawer, the same gray one he always chose when he stayed over. I brushed my teeth while he washed his face in my bathroom sink, and we navigated around each other in the small space with the practice choreography of roommates. But when we settled into my bed, something had changed. The mattress felt smaller than it ever had before, and I found myself hyper-aware of every inch of space between us. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, and I turned onto my side, facing away from him, trying to create whatever distance I could manage in a bed meant for one. "I can't sleep," he whispered into the darkness. Neither could I. My heart was beating too fast, too loud, and I was certain he could hear it in the silence. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, could sense the exact moment when he turned toward me, when his breathing changed from the shallow rhythm of someone pretending to rest to something deeper, more intentional. "Elias," he said, my name a question in the dark. I turned to face him, and suddenly we were closer than we had ever been. Close enough that I could see the way his pupils had dilated in the dim light filtering through my curtains. Close enough that when he shifted slightly, our shoulders brushed beneath the blanket. I held my breath and waited for him to pull away, to realize what we were doing and retreat to the safer distance of friendship. Instead, he moved closer. Just barely. Just enough that the space between us became charged with possibility. "I don't know what I'm doing," he whispered. "Neither do I whispered back, and it was the most honest thing I'd said in months. We lay there in the tension of almost, in the space between what was and what could be. His grief and my longing filled the room like smoke, making it difficult to breathe, difficult to think beyond the immediate reality of his presence beside me. I wanted to reach out and touch his face, to smooth away the worry lines that had appeared between his eyebrows. I wanted to pull him against me and let him fall apart in the safety of my arms. I wanted to tell him that some kinds of distance are protection, that sometimes we hold back not because we do not care, but because we care too much in ways that might frighten the people we love most. Instead, I closed my eyes and tried to memorize the sound of his breathing, the weight of him beside me, the impossible sweetness of this moment that I knew could not last. Tomorrow he would wake up and remember that I was just his friend, that this intimacy was born from heartbreak and loneliness and nothing more. But tonight, in the darkness of my small bedroom, with the city quiet beyond my windows and his warmth so close I could almost taste it, I allowed myself to hope. Just for a moment. Just long enough to understand that everything between us had already changed, even if neither of us was ready to name what it had become. I had always been the careful one, the one who measured twice and cut once, who planned every angle before putting pencil to paper. My apartment reflected this precision, this need for order in a world that felt increasingly unpredictable. Books lined the shelves in alphabetical order by author, their spines creating neat rows of color and texture. My drafting table sat positioned to catch the morning light, surrounded by the careful chaos of my architectural studies. Models of buildings I would probably never construct occupied every flat surface. Miniature worlds rendered in cardboard and foam core, each one a testament to possibility contained within precise measurements. This was my sanctuary. Small, yes, but intentionally so. Every object had its place. Every corner served a purpose. The kitchen table doubled as workspace when I needed to spread out large drawings. The windowsill held a collection of succulents that required minimal attention but added life to the sterile angles of my living space. Even the guitar in the corner, Damien's guitar, had become part of the landscape, leaning against the wall like it belonged there. I studied architecture because I understood the comfort of structure, the way lines and angles could create spaces that felt safe. My professors spoke of form following function, of buildings that serve their inhabitants, and I absorbed these lessons like someone learning a new language. The language of space and light, of how rooms could hold people and how people could fill rooms with meaning. Damien lived differently. His apartment across town was larger than mine, shared with two roommates who came and went like weather patterns. Where I collected books and sketches, he collected people. His phone buzzed constantly with invitations, with friends making plans, with the kind of social energy that I had never quite mastered. He studied business with the same casual confidence he applied to everything else, as if success were simply a matter of showing up and letting his natural charisma do the work. We had been roommates during our first year at university, thrown together by the randomness of housing assignments, and somehow managing to create something that felt like friendship. I was 19 and desperately homesick, spending most evenings alone with my textbooks. Damien was 19 and seemingly allergic to solitude, filling our tiny dorm room with visitors and music, and the kind of laughter that made other students linger in our hallway just to be near the sound of it. He was everything I was not: tall where I was average height, outgoing where I preferred observation, comfortable in his own skin in ways that I envied. His dark hair always looked perfectly disheveled, as if he had just run his fingers through it, which he probably had. His smile came easily, transforming his entire face, and when he laughed, really laughed, he threw his head back like he was making an offering to the sky. I had learned to love him carefully, the way one might tend a plant that required specific conditions to survive. Never too much attention, never too little. Always aware of the precise balance needed to maintain what we had without destroying it by wanting more. That first year, I watched him date a series of girls who seemed to blur together in my memory. Blonde, brunette, redhead, it did not matter. They were all variations on a theme that excluded me entirely. I convinced myself that this was simply the natural order of things. Damien was straight, popular, destined for the kind of conventional happiness that appeared in advertisements and romantic comedies. I was his friend, his study partner, the one who helped him with his economics homework and listened when he needed to complain about professors or family or the general unfairness of having to wake up before 10 in the morning. But there were moments when the careful architecture of our friendship revealed hairline cracks. Times when he would lean too close while looking at something on my computer screen, his shoulder pressing against mine with a warmth that lingered long after he moved away. Nights when we would end up walking back for parties together, his arms slung casually around my shoulders as we navigated the uneven sidewalks, and I would find myself memorizing the weight of his touch, storing it away like evidence of something I could not name. He had a way of looking at me, sometimes, usually when he thought I was not paying attention, that made me wonder what he saw. His gaze would linger just a moment too long, his expression unreadable, and then he would smile, or make a joke, or change the subject entirely, leaving me to question whether I had imagined the whole thing. When we moved into separate apartments the following year, I told myself it was for the best. Space would give me perspective, distance would help me recalibrate the careful boundaries I had let slip during our months of shared living. But Damien had other ideas. He began showing up at my door with increasing frequency, armed with takeout food and the excuse that my place was quieter than his, better for studying, closer to campus. I never questioned these explanations, even when they made no sense. His apartment was actually closer to most of our classes. His roommates were no more distracting than the construction noise from the building project next to mine. But I opened my door each time, made room on my couch, shared my space with the same careful attention I brought to everything else in my life. The guitar had arrived last summer, during a week when his air conditioning broke and he decided my place was cooler. He brought it along with clothes for several days, settling into my routine like he had never left. When a repair was finished and he finally returned to his own apartment, the guitar remained, forgotten or perhaps deliberately abandoned. I had been meaning to return it for months, but somehow it had become part of the furniture, part of the landscape of missing him that I carried even when he was not there. The breakup happened on a Tuesday. I knew because Damien texted me immediately afterward, a single word that arrived while I was in my structural engineering lecture. Done. The message read, just like that. For letters to summarize the end of 2 years. I stared at my phone screen longer than I should have, aware that my professor was still talking about load-bearing calculations, but unable to focus on anything except the weight of that word. Done. Final and absolute, like a door closing or a light switching off. I wanted to respond immediately, to offer comfort or ask questions, or simply acknowledge that I had received this piece of his pain, but the lecture hall felt too public, too exposed. Instead, I slipped my phone back into my pocket and tried to concentrate on forces and tensions and the mathematics of things holding together under pressure. Later, when I finally called him, his voice sounded hollowed out. She said I was distant, he told me. Said she never knew what I was thinking. Said she felt like she was dating a stranger. I wanted to tell him that some people mistake mystery for distance, that perhaps she simply did not speak the same language as his silences. Instead, I asked if he wanted to come over, if he needed company, if there was anything I could do. No, he said, I need to figure this out on my own. But within hours, he was at my door anyway. Not with his usual confident knock, but with a hesitant tapping that sounded like a question. When I opened it, he looked smaller somehow, diminished by whatever conversation had ended his relationship. His hair was disheveled in a way that suggested anxiety rather than his usual careless style, and he carried himself like someone who had forgotten how his own body was supposed to move. I thought you said you needed to figure things out on your own, I said gently. He shrugged and stepped inside without invitation. Yeah, well, turns out I'm terrible at being alone right now. This became our new routine. Damien would show up at my apartment most evenings, sometimes with excuses about needing a quiet place to study, sometimes with takeout food as an offering, sometimes with nothing but the raw need for company. He never stayed the night during those first weeks, always returning to his own place before it got too late, but his presence began to reshape the careful order of my space. His textbooks appeared on my coffee table. His jacket found a home draped over the back of my desk chair. One evening, I discovered his phone charger plugged into the outlet beside my bed, and I stared at it for a long time, trying to understand what it meant that he felt comfortable claiming small pieces of my territory. The change in him was subtle but undeniable. The easy confidence that had always defined him flickered like a candle in wind. He laughed less, smiled with effort rather than instinct. Sometimes I would catch him staring at nothing, his mind clearly elsewhere, working through thoughts he could not or would not share. I watched him carefully during those weeks, cataloging the small signs of his internal weather. The way he picked at his food instead of eating. The way he checked his phone compulsively, then set it aside with something that looked like disappointment. The way he positioned himself on my couch, as if he were trying to disappear into the cushions. One night, after we had been watching a movie neither of us was really paying attention to, he asked the question that lodged itself in my chest like a splinter. Why is it easier to be around you than anyone else right now? The room fell silent except for the ambient noise from the television, some action sequence that suddenly felt absurd and distant. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something in his expression that I could not quite name. Vulnerability, yes, but something else too. Something that made my heart beat faster and my mouth go dry. I don't know, I said finally, which was both true and completely inadequate. He nodded as if my non-answer had satisfied him somehow, then returned his attention to the screen. But I could feel the question hanging in the air between us, reshaping the atmosphere of my living room into something charged and dangerous. As the weeks passed, his visits became less about distraction and more about necessity. He would arrive earlier and stay later, finding reasons to linger even when it was clear he was exhausted. One evening, after falling asleep on my couch during a documentary about sustainable architecture, he woke up disoriented and asked if he could just stay the night. My place feels too empty, he explained. Too quiet. I keep expecting to hear her moving around, and when I don't, it's like the silence is screaming. I understood. I had always preferred quiet, but the quality of silence in a space where someone used to be was different from the silence of solitude. It carried weight, demanded attention, refused to be ignored. Of course you can stay, I told him. That night, he slept on my couch, borrowing pillows and blankets that still smelled like my laundry detergent. I lay in my bed, listening to the sounds of his breathing in the next room, hyper-aware of his presence in my space, even through the wall that separated us. I had shared this apartment with friends before, had overnight guests, but something about having Damien there felt different. More permanent, more significant, more like the beginning of something I could not yet articulate. When I woke up in the morning, he was already dressed and making coffee in my kitchen, moving through the space with an ease that suggested he had been doing this for years rather than hours. He looked up when he heard me stirring and smiled, the first genuine smile I had seen from him in weeks. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" I asked. "For not making me feel like a burden." What began as a single night stretched into something more permanent, though neither of us acknowledged it directly. Damien's presence in my apartment stopped feeling like a visit and started feeling like inhabitation. His toothbrush appeared beside mine in the bathroom, a blue plastic intruder that somehow belonged there. His clothes mixed with mine in the laundry basket, creating a domesticity I had never experienced but found myself craving. He moved through my space with increasing familiarity, opening my refrigerator without asking, borrowing my t-shirts when his own were dirty, settling into my routines as if they had always included him. In the mornings, I would wake to the sound of him making coffee, the familiar ritual of grinding beans and running water that had become the soundtrack to our shared days. He learned how I liked my breakfast, which mug I preferred, the way I took my coffee with just enough milk to change the color but not enough to mask the taste. The boundaries we had maintained for years began to dissolve in ways that felt both natural and terrifying. Where once he would have asked permission before using my shower, now he simply announced his intentions. Where once he might have hesitated before taking the last of something from my kitchen, now he ate with the casual assumption of someone who knew there would always be more food tomorrow. These small intimacies accumulated like sediment, building layers of shared life that I could not ignore. His razor appeared on my bathroom counter. His phone charger claimed permanent residence beside my bed. One evening, I opened my dresser to find that somehow his socks had migrated into my drawer, mixed with my own as if they belonged together. But it was the nights that undid me. Those long hours when darkness gave us permission to abandon the careful choreography we performed during daylight. Damien would appear in my bedroom doorway, unable to sleep, asking if he could just hang out for a bit. These visits became longer, more frequent, until he was spending more time in my bed than on the couch. We would lie side by side, ostensibly talking but really just existing in the same space, breathing the same air, sharing the same pillow landscape. The conversations during these hours took on a different quality, stripped of the social performance that daylight demanded. He told me things he had never shared before, about feeling disconnected from his own life, about the way his relationship with his ex-girlfriend had felt like playing a role he could never quite master, about the strange relief he felt now that the performance was over. I shared my own secrets in return, carefully edited versions of my thoughts and fears. I talked about my struggles with architecture, the way I sometimes felt like I was designing spaces for a life I would never live. I talked about loneliness, though I could not tell him that his presence had become both the cure and the cause of that particular ache. I talked about the future in abstract terms, avoiding the specifics of what I hoped might unfold between us. The physical distance between us shrank incrementally, night by night. What began with careful space between our bodies slowly contracted until we were lying close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. Our shoulders would brush as we shifted position. Our hands would accidentally meet when we both reached for the same corner blanket. These touches lingered longer than they should have, charged with something neither of us was ready to name. One night, I woke to find his arm draped across my waist, his body curved around mine in sleep. My heart hammered against my ribs as I tried to decide whether to move away or stay still. The weight of his arm felt like an anchor and a question mark simultaneously. I chose stillness, memorizing the sensation of being held, even accidentally, even unconsciously. When morning came, he woke in the same position, his eyes opening to find mine already watching him. For a moment, we stared at each other in the gray dawn light, both of us aware that something had shifted during the night. Then he smiled, soft and drowsy, and made no move to pull away. "Good morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning," I replied, hyper-aware of the way his breath touched my face when he spoke. He did pull away then, but slowly, reluctantly, as if he were testing the waters of separation. The space he left behind felt cold and too large, and I found myself fighting the urge to follow him, to close the distance he had created. These moments accumulated like evidence of something I could not quite prove. The way he watched me when he thought I was not looking, his gaze lingering on my hands as I worked on assignments, on my mouth when I spoke. I began to feel like I was living in a state of constant, almost suspended between what was happening and what might happen, between the safety of friendship and the terrifying possibility of something more. Every shared glance felt loaded with meaning. Every casual touch sent electricity through my nervous system. Every night that he chose my bed over his own apartment felt like a choice that meant more than either of us was willing to acknowledge. The transformation was happening to both of us. I realized. Whatever this was, whatever we were becoming, it was not something I was imagining or projecting. Damien was changing too, growing more attentive, more aware of the space between us, more deliberate in the way he occupied my life. The revelation came on a Thursday night, 3 weeks after Damien had started sleeping in my bed more often than not. I had grown accustomed to the weight of him beside me, to the sound of his breathing in the darkness, to the way he would shift closer in his sleep until we were sharing the same small island of warmth beneath the covers. But that night was different. I stirred sometime after 2 in the morning, pulled from sleep by some indefinable change in the atmosphere of the room. The streetlight outside cast its familiar amber glow through my curtains, painting everything in shades of gold and shadow. Damien was already awake beside me, lying on his side, facing me in the dim light. "How long have you been up?" I asked quietly. "A while," he said. His voice carried a weight I had not heard before, something deeper than the exhaustion that had become his constant companion since the breakup. "Can't sleep again." He was quiet for so long that I thought he might not answer. Then he shifted slightly, and I could feel the intentionality in the movement, the way someone moves when they have made a decision they cannot unmake. "I didn't know where else to go," he said finally. "After everything fell apart, I mean. I tried going to Marcus's place, tried hanging out with the guys from business class, tried just being alone and figuring things out. But here, with you, I feel okay. I feel like myself." The words hung in the air between us, loaded with implications that made my chest tight. I wanted to respond, to say something that would either encourage him to continue or redirect the conversation to safer territory, but I found myself paralyzed by the possibility that we were approaching something I could not take back. "Why do you think that is?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He moved closer then, not dramatically, not with any grand gesture, but with the slow deliberation of someone crossing a threshold they had been circling for weeks. His leg brushed against mine beneath the blankets, and he did not pull away. "I don't know," he said. "Maybe because you never expect me to be anything other than what I am." The space between us had become charged, electric with unspoken possibilities. I could feel the heat of his skin through the thin cotton of his borrowed t-shirt, could smell the familiar scent of my soap on his hair. Everything about the moment felt suspended, as if we were balanced on the edge of something that would change everything. "Elias," he said, my name a question in the darkness. "Yeah." He reached out then, his fingers finding my arm in the dim light, tracing a path from my wrist to my elbow with a touch so light it might have been accidental. But it was not accidental. The deliberateness of it, the way he watched my face as he did it, told me that this was a choice, a test, a leap into territory neither of us had mapped before. "I'm not sure what this makes me," he whispered. "What any of this means." My heart was beating so hard I was certain he could hear it in the quiet room. His fingers had stilled against my arm, but he had not pulled away, and I found myself caught between the urge to lean into his touch and the fear that moving at all might shatter whatever fragile thing was happening between us. "You don't have to know," I said finally. "You don't have to figure it all out tonight. But I want to know," he said. "I want to understand why being close to you feels different from being close to anyone else. Why I can sleep here when I can't sleep anywhere else. Why I keep choosing this, choosing you, even when I don't understand what I'm choosing." He moved closer still, and suddenly his breath was warm against my neck, his body curved around mine in a way that felt both protective and vulnerable. His arms slipped around my waist with a tentative pressure, as if he were asking permission even as he took it. The revelation was not a dramatic declaration or a sudden kiss. It was quieter than that, more fundamental. It was the acknowledgement that this closeness was no longer about comfort or convenience or the aftermath of his breakup. It was about need, about desire, about something that had been building between us for longer than either of us had been willing to admit. "I feel it too," I whispered into the darkness, the words barely audible but carrying the weight of months of careful silence. His arm tightened around me slightly, pulling me back against his chest until I could feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat through his shirt. We lay there in the amber light from the street, breathing in synchronization, both of us aware that we had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. "I know you do," he said softly. "I think I've known for a while." The admission settled between us like something both heavy and weightless, a truth that changed everything and nothing simultaneously. We were still the same two people who had been sharing this space for weeks, still the same friends who had learned to navigate each other's rhythms and silences. But we were also something else now, something unnamed and fragile and terrifying in its possibility. Neither of us spoke after that. There would be time for words later, time for definitions and explanations and all the complicated logistics of what this might mean for our friendship, for our futures, for the careful architecture of our separate lives. But in that moment, in the quiet sanctuary of my bedroom, with the world asleep beyond my windows, it was enough to simply exist in the space we had created together, to let the revelation settle into our bones without demanding immediate understanding. His breathing gradually deepened as he drifted towards sleep, but his arm remained around me, holding me close with a possessiveness that felt both new and ancient, as if we had been moving toward this moment for longer than we had been conscious of wanting it. The morning after changed everything and nothing. Damien woke with his arms still around me, and for a moment we lay in the gray dawn light, neither of us willing to move or speak or acknowledge what had shifted between us in the darkness. Then he pulled away, slowly but decisively, and the spell was broken. He made coffee with the same careful attention he always did, but his movements carried a new tension, as if he were performing a familiar dance while learning different steps. We did not talk about what had happened. Not directly. Instead, we fell into a pattern of avoidance disguised as normalcy. He still came to my apartment every evening, still stayed for dinner, still settled onto my couch, as if it were his natural habitat. But something had changed in the daylight hours, some fundamental shift in the way he carried himself when the sun was up and the world was watching. During the day, he was careful. He maintained distance, kept his hands to himself, spoke to me with the same casual friendship we had always shared. But I could see the effort it required, the way he would start to reach for me and then stop himself, the way his eyes would linger on my face before he remembered to look away. It was worse for me. The acknowledgement of what lay between us had stripped away the comfortable denial I had lived with for months. Every casual interaction became loaded with the weight of what we both now knew but could not discuss in the light of day. When he handed me a cup of coffee, his fingers would brush mine and I would feel the contact like electricity. When he laughed at something I said, I found myself analyzing the sound for hidden meaning, for evidence that this new awareness had changed the way he heard me. The nights, however, belonged to a different version of us. As soon as darkness fell, the careful boundaries he maintained during the day would begin to soften. He would find reasons to be closer, sitting beside me on the couch instead of in the chair across the room, letting his knee rest against mine while we watched television, falling asleep with his head on my shoulder during movies we pretended to care about. But it was when we retreated to my bedroom that the real transformation occurred. Away from the judgment of daylight, away from the expectations of a world that might not understand, we allowed ourselves to exist in the space we had created. He would reach for me in the darkness, pulling me close with a hunger that felt both desperate and inevitable. We would lie pressed together, our bodies learning the geography of this new intimacy, while our minds struggled to process what it meant. One night, perhaps 2 weeks after that first revelation, I could no longer bear the contradiction. The careful distance during the day, followed by the desperate closeness after dark, felt like living two separate lives, and I was exhausted by the effort of maintaining both versions of myself. I can't keep pretending this doesn't mean anything to me, I said into the darkness. The words escaped before I could stop them, raw and honest, and terrifying in their finality. Damien went very still beside me, his breathing shallow and quick. "What are you saying?" he asked quietly. I turned to face him in the dim light, gathering courage from the shadows that made truth-telling feel safer. "I'm saying that this, whatever this is between us, it's not just comfort for me. It's not just because you needed somewhere to stay after your breakup. It's because I've been in love with you for longer than I know how to admit, and I can't pretend anymore that these nights don't matter." The silence that followed felt endless. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel the heat of his body beside me, could sense the exact moment when he stopped breathing altogether. I had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed, had spoken words that would hang between us regardless of how he chose to respond. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I know," he said. "I think I've known for a while now." "That's not an answer," I said. He shifted closer, his hand finding mine in the tangle of bedsheets. "I don't know what this makes me," he said finally. "I don't know what it means that I can't sleep without you next to me, that I think about your hands when I'm supposed to be paying attention in class, that every time someone asks me what I want, the only answer I can think of is you." His thumb traced circles against my palm, a nervous gesture that felt more intimate than any grand romantic declaration. "I've never felt this way about anyone," he continued. "Not about her. Not about any of the girls I dated before her. I used to think there was something wrong with me, that I was broken somehow, because I never felt what I thought I was supposed to feel. And now I think maybe I was just waiting for the right person," he said. "Maybe I was waiting for you." The admission hung between us like a bridge we could choose to cross or burn. I could feel the weight of the decision in the space between our bodies, in the way he held my hand like an anchor, in the careful way he watched my face for a reaction. "I don't know what happens next," he said. "I don't know how to do this, how to be this. But I know I need you close. I know I can't go back to pretending that what we have is just friendship." "Neither can I whispered. We lay there in the aftermath of honesty, both of us aware that we had fundamentally altered the trajectory of our lives with words spoken in darkness. There would be questions to answer, futures to reimagine, a world beyond my bedroom that would demand explanations we did not yet have. But in that moment, wrapped in the safety of night and each other's arms, it was enough to have named the thing that had been growing between us, to have chosen truth over the comfortable lie of pretending we were still just friends. The silence after our confessions was not empty. It was full of everything we had not said, everything we still did not know how to say, everything that stretched out before us like an unmapped territory we would have to navigate together. We lay in the darkness of my bedroom, the city quiet beyond my windows, and I found myself memorizing the weight of this moment, knowing that it would become the dividing line between who we had been and who we were choosing to become. Damien's breathing gradually settled into the rhythm of approaching sleep, but his arm remained around me with a possessiveness that felt different now. Before tonight, his touch had carried the tentative quality of someone testing boundaries, uncertain of his welcome. Now there was a claiming in it, a certainty that spoke of decisions made and bridges crossed. His fingers traced lazy patterns against my back through the thin fabric of my t-shirt, and each small movement felt like punctuation to the conversation we had just finished, emphasis on words that would reshape everything. I stayed awake long after his breathing deepened into true sleep, my mind cycling through all the implications of what we had admitted to each other. Tomorrow would bring questions we had not yet learned how to answer. Our friends would want to understand the shift in our dynamic, though we could not yet explain it ourselves. His family, who had known me as his friend for years, would need to recalibrate their understanding of who I was in his life. My own parents, who had never asked the questions I had never been ready to answer, might finally receive the explanations I had been avoiding. But these concerns felt distant, theoretical, like problems that belonged to some future version of ourselves. In the immediate reality of my small bedroom, with the amber streetlight painting everything in shades of gold and shadow, there was only this, the solid warmth of him beside me, the steady rhythm of his heart against my back, the impossible sweetness of being held by someone who had finally chosen to stop pretending he did not want to hold me. When morning came, it arrived slowly, gray light filtering through my curtains with the careful gentleness of something that understood the fragility of what it was illuminating. I woke to find Damien already awake, watching me with an expression I had never seen before. Not the careful observation of friendship, not the desperate need that had characterized these past weeks, but something quieter, more permanent. Something that looked like recognition. "Good morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep, but carrying none of the uncertainty that had marked our previous mornings together. "Good morning," I replied, suddenly conscious of how different this felt from every other morning we had shared. There was no awkwardness, no careful retreat into the safer territory of friendship. Just this new reality we had created, solid and undeniable in the daylight. He shifted closer, pressing his forehead against mine in a gesture so intimate it made my chest tight. "We should probably talk about what happens now," he said. Probably, I agreed, though neither of us moved to create the distance that talking might require. "I don't have answers yet," he said. "I don't know what to call this, or how to explain it to people, or what it means for everything else in my life. But I know I don't want to go back to pretending." "I don't either," I said. We lay there as the room slowly brightened around us, both of us aware that we were suspended between the confession of the night before and the practical realities of whatever came next. No labels, no promises, no grand declarations about the future. Just the acknowledgement that we had crossed a threshold that could not be uncrossed, that we had chosen each other in a way that made retreat impossible. Eventually, he would need to return to his own apartment, to collect clothes and check messages and maintain the appearance of a separate life. Eventually, we would need to navigate the careful choreography of being together in public, of deciding what to reveal and what to keep private, of learning how to be ourselves in a world that might not immediately understand what we had become. But not yet. For now, there is only this quiet sanctuary we had created together, this small space where honesty was possible and touch carried no ambiguity. His hand found mine beneath the covers, our fingers interlacing with the natural ease of something that had been waiting to happen for longer than either of us had been willing to admit. The future stretched out before us, uncertain and unmapped, full of questions we would need to answer and challenges we could not yet anticipate. We would need to learn a new language for what we were to each other. We need to navigate the complex geography of a relationship that fit no easy category. We would need to be patient with ourselves and with each other as we figured out how to love honestly after so many months of careful silence. But in that moment, in the growing light of morning with the weight of truth finally shared between us, it was enough to simply exist together. No words, no analysis, no planning for what came next. Just the quiet certainty that we had found something worth the risk of everything we thought we knew about ourselves. Our hands resting on the same pillow, fingertips barely touching, a question answered and 1,000 new questions beginning. The night outside had given way to day, but we remained suspended in the space between sleeping and waking, between what we had been and what we were becoming, between the safety of silence and the terrifying beauty of being known.